Your Excellencies, heads of delegation, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, we congratulate the government of Egypt for having convened this forum. No issue requires more cooperation than finding solutions to the climate crisis. The essence of cooperation requires partners willing to listen and partners willing to act. The United Nations Economic Commission for Africa has been delighted to co-convene the Forum for African Ministers to engage ahead of COP27 on issues which can transform the finance landscape. For this African COP, we're seeking to not only have pledges at COP27, but to redefine the landscape for climate finance. The unfulfilled $100 billion promise is one which threatens to put cooperation for climate action at risk. We have to recognize at this juncture that the succession of crises from the COVID pandemic to the war in Ukraine has actually fractured the ability to address financing for development. Africa's NDCs are estimated at over $3 trillion worth of investments in adaptation and mitigation. Achieving energy access alone in line with SDG 7 represents $500 billion investments by 2030 for African countries. Official development, at the same time, official development finance must act as a catalyst to unlock additional financing in Africa and the most climate vulnerable countries. And if done right, it can create the opportunity to create market conditions for African countries to have predictable access to climate finance. We really need to prioritize African agency in the mobilization of finance. And there is the urgency as well to do it. In that context, the issue of access to private sector finance and for it to be affordable is key for African countries, and this is why focus of the event has been the means of reducing the cost of green borrowing. Green bond financing has become increasingly the vehicle used to channel finance to climate resilience. The overall issuance of green bonds more than doubled between 2019 and 2021 globally. However, Africa has only less than 0.5% share of these global issuances. I think there is something fundamentally wrong with that picture. The high cost of issuance is a key part of that, as is the limited opportunity for trading of African bonds on secondary markets. Let me recall here that African infrastructure projects' default rate are actually low, at around 5%. And if we even compare it to other regions in the world, it's much lower, compared to 13% in Latin America and about 9% in Asia and Eastern Europe. It's in this context that the Economic Commission for Africa has supported the development of a liquidity and sustainability facility. This could generate savings of up to $11 billion in 5 years on interest rates for African sovereign issuers. We must also use this African COP to link debt issuances to climate resilience. The use of key performance indicators set by countries themselves, aligned with their NDCs, is a key way to translate ambition expressed by African countries to actually affordable climate-linked investments. We welcome the proposed creation of a sustainable sovereign debt hub to support countries to be able to refinance existing debt or issue new debt aligned with key performance indicators for climate. This hub would allow countries to propose swaps of expensive existing debt to generate new resources, to invest in climate resilience, and also allow new issuances to be done linked to climate resilience objectives. Mobilizing predictable sources of revenue is a priority for African countries. And in this context, the Economic Commission for Africa has been supporting the development of capacity of African countries to access carbon markets. Specifically, the Commission has supported the development of a harmonized protocol and creation of a regional registry for the potential issuance of carbon credits by countries of the Congo Basin Climate Commission. A high-integrity carbon market can actually stimulate ambition to develop sustainable value chains that protect Africa's natural capital. Critically, it can create incentive to prioritize climate resilience while actually raising resources that can invest in addressing climate goals, as well as sustainable development goals more broadly. ECA has estimated that if African countries are able to trade their carbon at least $50 per ton, this creates a flow of around $15 billion a year. I think this is quite telling, the type of resources that the continent can actually obtain if the global system is actually properly compensating the continent for its contribution to the solution of climate change. Finally, allow me to highlight ECA's role in facilitating the development of a pipeline of projects for the continent. We convened the first of regional roundtables on climate finance in Addis from 2nd to 4th of August, where over $100 billion of projects were identified, both in the adaptation and mitigation. We have had realistic conversations on how these projects can be financed. In many cases, they cannot get off the ground without de-risking support. But what is clear is their transformative impact, and this must drive us to make them happen. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the United Nations Economic Commission for Africa is proud to support this co-convening, which is not only critical for a successful African COP, but which can contribute to redefining development for the whole African continent. These are the enablers that will allow us the implementation to happen and to be done at scale. African countries need support, and promises must be kept. But African countries are determined to also be the owners and drivers of their own solutions. This is what we have seen at this International Cooperation Forum, and we congratulate the government of Egypt and the COP27 president once again for this leadership. Thank you.